Freddie Gray's death last weekend after falling into a coma from something as yet unexplained that happened to him in Baltimore police custody. Freddie Gray's death is the proximate cause of what has blown up in the streets of Baltimore today and tonight. But it is just the latest in a recent string of police violence cases that have not only affected the communities and the families directly involved, they have blown up into a national conversation and at times a national crisis about police violence and how communities respond to it. You can also put a marker here on August 9th, 2014, with the police shooting of Michael Brown. Michael Brown was 18 years old and unarmed when he was killed by a police officer in Ferguson, Missouri. Michael Brown's death led to weeks of protest over the last summer. A few months later, in November, a grand jury cleared the officer who killed Michael Brown of all charges. They decided not to indict that officer, and during the protests that followed that decision, local businesses in Ferguson, Missouri were burned to the ground. Another man, Eric Garner, on Staten Island, New York, he died after police put him in a chokehold while arresting him for selling loose cigarettes on the sidewalk in Staten Island. Eric Garner actually died a few weeks before Michael Brown was shot in Ferguson, but the protests in Ferguson seemed to amplify the response to Eric Garner's death, and thousands of people marched on Staten Island last summer to protest what happened to Eric Garner. And then when a grand jury decided not to indict the police officers in Eric Garner's death in December, the protests started again with people blocking highways and blocking bridges, not just in New York City, but around the country. Meanwhile, police in Cleveland responded to a call in a local park. 12-year-old Tamir Rice, 12 years old, had been playing with a realistic-looking airsoft pellet gun. Within a blink of pulling up to him, in less than 3 seconds of driving up to him in that park, one of the officers shot and killed that 12-year-old kid. That was in November. No one has been charged in 12-year-old Tamir Rice's killing. In February, it was police in suburban Madison, Alabama, who stopped Sureshbhay Patel after somebody reported a stranger walking through the neighborhood. Mr. Patel was a grandfather who was in Madison, Alabama to visit family members. One of the officers slammed him to the ground so hard, he left Mr. Patel paralyzed. That officer was charged with third-degree assault and felony civil rights abuse. That same month, it was police in Pasco, Washington, who shot an unarmed man who had been throwing rocks at them. They shot Antonio Zambrano Montes 17 times as Mr. Zambrano Montes ran away from them. 17 times. Mr. Zambrano Montes was killed. No one has been charged. Last month in Inkster, Michigan, a man named Floyd Dent came forward to say that he'd been pulled over and beaten by local police in Inkster. He was beaten very badly, left with a fractured eye socket and broken ribs. It all happened to him in January, but the tape of his beating has been playing on a loop in the Detroit area since it surfaced just a few weeks ago. Last week, one of the officers in that case was charged with felony mistreatment of a prisoner, and the charge against Mr. Dent was erased. Just today, we got video of officers in the Inkster station house appearing to try to spray Floyd Dent's blood off their clothes and their hands. And then the officers exchanged fist bumps, apparently celebrating how well that arrest and that beating went for them. An attorney for Mr. Dent says his client was actually at that moment lying there, still bleeding, still needing urgent medical attention, just out of view of the camera as the officers blew off steam and reenacted the arrest and the beating for each other. The beginning of this month brought news of the shooting death of unarmed Walter Scott in North Charleston, South Carolina. That confrontation also began with a seemingly anodyne traffic stop. It ended with the officer firing multiple times at Mr. Scott's back as Mr. Scott fled across a vacant lot. He shot him as he ran away. The officer in that case has been charged with murder. As the nation was absorbing that news, word came from Tulsa, Oklahoma, that someone holding the title of reserve deputy in the Tulsa Sheriff's Department had shot and killed a suspect in an undercover drug sting. The reserve deputy, a 73-year-old insurance executive, says he meant to draw his taser, but he mistakenly pulled his gun instead, and he shot Eric Harris in Tulsa, fatally. Robert Bates, the reserve deputy, had been a longtime generous donor to the Sheriff's Department. That seems to be the way you get a reserve deputy position. The Tulsa World reported that supervisors in the Tulsa Sheriff's Office had falsified the training records of Mr. Bates, so he allegedly, at least, appeared to be qualified for certain duties when he was not. Last week, Robert Bates, the reserve deputy, pled guilty to a charge of manslaughter in that case. But then the judge in the case allowed him to go to the Bahamas for a family vacation. before any further proceedings. Today in Tulsa, a top official in that sheriff's department resigned after an internal memo surfaced that showed him asking staffers to modify the reserve deputies' reviews and records about hours of training. That high-ranking official stepped down today in Tulsa. Meanwhile, though, the Tulsa Sheriff's Department also inexplicably released undercover video showing the man who got killed in the days leading up to the day they shot and killed him. They released this video showing Eric Harris selling drugs to an undercover officer before making an arrangement to sell him a gun. Why did they release that tape? It didn't happen on the day of the shooting. Does not seem to be relevant specifically to the reason this reserve deputy pulled out his gun when he thought he was pulling out his taser. The Sheriff's Department in Tulsa said they released the video because the media had asked for it, which could conceivably be true if anybody knew it existed. But it also looks a lot like what happened in Ferguson, Missouri last summer when the police chief in Ferguson released video of 18-year-old Michael Brown from before the incident in which Michael Brown was shot and killed. Tape of a totally unrelated incident in a convenience store that happened before he was killed and at which the officer who killed him was not present. The chief said the media had been clamoring for that convenience store tape, and he couldn't continue to withhold it, even though in Ferguson there does not appear to be much record at all that anybody asked to see that tape. They just felt the need to put it out there to try to make Michael Brown look as terrible as possible. We have been living this story over and over and over, month after month, shooting after chokehold after beating, right? I mean, this list that I just did is by no means complete. You just pick a calendar month and Google around and up pops a story, and now increasingly a video of police violence, mostly involving an unarmed man who is not white.